Hello, it's Mike from Vitreus Art. I'm doing a follow-up video to the one I did the other day looking at the tools you need for copper foiling stained glass. Today it's about leading stained glass. Which tools and other materials do you need to do to get started in that? Before I do, I'm just going to talk a little bit about designs because we get quite a lot of questions about designs. Do you cut the pieces out of the pattern? Do you use pattern shears and put them on the glass? How do you make sure that when you cut the glass you end up with enough room between adjacent pieces of coloured glass to allow room for the heart of the lead of the cane? We tend to use 1/4 inch and narrower leads in our work, especially on our workshops for beginners and up. And the heart of the lead is about 1 mil, slightly under, it's about 0.8 of a mil. And the best way we have found of making sure that the pieces of glass, when you've cut and ground everything, will leave room for the heart of the lead, the 0.8 mil heart of the lead, is to use a Sharpie pen, something like that, to create your design. So if you have a look at this, I've got a piece of clear glass on top of the design. This is one of the designs we do on a beginner's class. It's fairly easy design, easily achievable by a beginner in a day from scratch. The lines that we've drawn for the design were drawn with a Sharpie pen. We then photocopy these in some volume because we get through quite a lot of paper designs. And if one cuts the glass on the inside of the black line on this kind of design, having used a Sharpie pen to get that width of the black line correct, then all of your pieces of glass, when they're cut, will automatically include enough space between piece A and its neighbour piece B to allow for the heart of the lead. That's the simplest way of doing it that I can think of. We did try using pattern shears. I know they're quite popular in America, but it seems like an awful lot of extra work to have to do to cut out pieces of paper, to stick them to the glass, to cut round those, deal with the inevitable fact that the pieces of glass are a little bit bigger than the design is meant to leave them. So easiest way that we can think of, and we've certainly been using this way for 17 or 18 years, it seems to work, is to use a pen with the right kind of sized tip, like the bullet tip or the fine point on a Sharpie pen, to create your design, and then cut the glass on the inside edge of the black line. When I say the inside edge, the inside of the piece that you want to keep. So if I'm cutting this section here, it would be where my thumbnail is, just on the inside of the black line. Right, so that's the design bit done. I just wanted to get that off my chest, really. Also, before we really get stuck into it, we got a lot of people asking, so what kind of leading board do you use? Do you create battens and nail them in every time? We don't. Life's too short, frankly. I'm hoping to retire in about 20 years. So we make our own boards. You will need a board with a right angle at some point, probably to begin with. And my advice would be, make the biggest board that you've got room to store, because you can always do smaller projects on a bigger board. You can't do bigger projects on a smaller board. We've got lots of different sizes. We use those for workshops. Smaller boards take up less room on the bench, so we use those when we can, but we've got large window size boards as well. MDF, make sure it's quite thick so that it won't warp or twist too much. 18 mil MDF I would suggest. Offcuts of wood, make sure your 90-degree angle is accurate, so you use a miter saw or something like that to cut that, and then glue and screw so that it's really, really tough. The ones I made when we started out a long time ago, we're still using, because I made them fairly durable. Okay, they look pretty scruffy, but they're really sturdy, and we still use them. So if you make a decent board to start off with, it'll serve you well. And of course, it doesn't mean that you can't do projects that don't have right angles. We make our mirrors, like for instance, we do a beginner's mirror stained glass class. And you can easily make a mirror in the middle of your board, or a non-regular shape. Anyway, anything that doesn't have a right angle, you can still make on this board. Right, so I think it would make sense to talk through the tools that you'll need for leading in the order that you would use them in a project. And I will say, just at this point, in case I've already forgotten, all of the tools that you need for foiling I've already done in another video, and that means therefore then the glass cutters I don't need to talk about now. I'm not going to talk about breaking tools or straight edges or soldering irons or anything like that. I'll just talk about the tools and materials that you need for leading that are different or in addition to the ones you'd use for foiling. Right, so we've talked about the board. You will need a board. It's not the first thing you'll need, but you will need it. So you might as well get yourself one, make one, whatever. So thinking about the sequence of events, cutting, grinding, leading, soldering, cementing. So we need to do the leading. As I've already said, and I said on a couple of other videos as well, we tend to use flat leads ourselves. That's a 1/4 inch or a 6mm flat H. And then we tend to use the U-cames ourselves around the edges because we think they give a slightly more contemporary look. That's not to say that the round versions aren't with their merits, and round H leads are easier to shape around tight curves. Actually, they don't buckle quite so readily. So if you're doing a design that's got a lot of curves in it, especially quite tight curves, the rounded leads might make more sense. So you'll need a set of leads, and another piece of advice I would give you is buy more lead than you think you will need, because if you run out, obviously it's a pain because it interrupts your project, but also they do vary from shipment to shipment. We tend to buy leads in large boxes, in 25 kilo boxes or bigger. So we've usually got enough leads for even quite a big project on hand at any one time, and enough for workshops. So we don't have to worry so much. But if you're buying leads a few at a time, by post perhaps, I would definitely suggest buying more than you think you will need, maybe double the number you'll need, because the next shipment that you buy in a hurry when you really need some to finish off a project might be a bit different from the ones you bought last time, or you might find your supplier is out of stock and you've got to get a slightly different shape or something like that. So make sure you've got your stock in hand before you start your project. It'll be the same with glass, of course, as well, but often people are a bit surprised by how different leads can look from shipment to shipment, or certainly different manufacturers' leads, even if they're described the same. A 6x5H flat, for example, they might well look different from different manufacturers. Okay, so that's the leads. You need a means of cutting the leads. We use two tools ourselves, especially on our workshops. So there's the lead knife. We tend to use these fairly inexpensive ones because they get a hammering. We just sharpen them with an oil stone. I'll show you what that is in a mo. Does need to be kept sharp, so an oil stone is a worthwhile thing to have. But we tend to mainly use the lead nips. They do have another name, which is quite a traditional name, which these days is somewhat out of vogue term. So let's just call them lead nips. These are lip on it. These do blunt from after use, and they can't really be sharpened very easily. So I would suggest if you're going to buy a pair, buy another pair as well, so that when you detect that the leads crush when you cut them using these, that tells you they're blunt. Get your other pair out, okay? Nice, easy tool to use. Once you figure out the angles and how you hold them and so on, it's a really quick, simple tool to use, so we really like that. If you prefer to do things using the more traditional tool, the lead knife, then you probably want a better quality one than this. These are about 5 or 6 quid. That's great for a workshop environment because when they get dropped or whatever, or broken or rusted or something, it's not too much of a loss. If you're going to do this yourself, you might want to buy a better one that will maintain its edge better. I wouldn't necessarily suggest worrying too much about the weighted handle type. If the lead knife blade is the bit that matters, get one with a really good stainless steel, very sharp blade. The weighted handle, which you might use to bang in your lead nails, it's never really heavy enough. So get yourself a good old-fashioned hammer. I mean, they're not exactly expensive. Every toolkit has one probably. I prefer to use a hammer to bang the horseshoe nails in. So you will need a fair number of horseshoe nails. Get a couple of packets because they warp, they twist, they rust, they get lost, they fall on the floor and you never find them again. Always worth having more on hand. Why do we use horseshoe nails? That's a good question. We always get that at craft fairs and things when we're doing demos. It's because you give it a wiggle and it comes out. You don't need a pair of pliers to dig it out. So horseshoe nails are the way to go. Oil stone. This is to sharpen your lead knife. The edge will dull over time, so you'll need an oil stone and suitable honing oil as well. You can get these any DIY store. Don't neglect to buy this because you'll need it. even if you only occasionally use your lead knife, it'll go blunt at some point, or it'll get cruddy on the end, it'll rust up or something, and your oil stone and your honing oil is the way to solve that. You can also use it for chisels and knives and things like that. What else will you need? You'll need a means of stretching your leads. Now, I know some people that aren't entirely convinced you need to stretch your leads. I'm pretty sure you do, because they always come out really soft and kinky from the box when you buy them. I might have to edit that in case Facebook doesn't like it. You need to stretch them a little bit, 10% at the max. Don't overstretch them, because they'll want to try to retract and resume their original length if you do, and that might well buckle your piece. But you need a lead vise. There are other ways of doing it, but this is the simple tool. It clamps over the edge of your workbench. You need a handy clamp to hold it there. The lead goes inside. You stretch it with a pair of pliers, maybe tidy the lead up with a fid, and then you're done. But you definitely need one of those. It's one of those things where the alternative, which might save you £6, is a lot more time and a lot more hassle, and probably having to find somewhere to mount a clamp to a bench or a door frame or something like that. I'm a bit of a believer that someone has gone to the trouble of designing a tool that is perfect for the job. I would suggest just use it. You'll also need a fid for shaping and smoothing your leads. That's what a fid looks like. Yours might well be blue. Classic American seems to be the brand that everyone goes for. It's useful for a lot of things. You'd have this in your foiling toolkit as well, so get yourself a fid. When the time comes to solder, it's the same as soldering iron that you use for your foiling. We certainly do. We've got about a dozen Weller 100 watts, 370 degrees C tip temperature, 700 Fahrenheit. It's a little bit hotter than you might ideally want for leading. Some people prefer to have a temperature controlled iron that they can turn down a little bit. Personally, I find it's easily possible to do leading, soldering with the Weller 100 watt irons. Been doing it for a long time and don't often melt the cames. The other thing you will need, for foiling, you might well be using 60-40 solder because it gives a shinier finish and it's easier to control the flow. For leading, 50-50 is better, actually. It costs a bit less as well. That's what will give you a decent mechanical joint and a nice rounded blob, nice and smooth. So get some 50-50 if you're using a different grade for your foiling. You'll need tallow as well. There are other kinds of fluxes, like the Tellux flux that you'd use when soldering zinc, you can use with lead, but tallow is the inexpensive flux that has been used for lead work for hundreds, well, probably almost 1,000 years, possibly. So get yourself a couple of tallow candles. We talked about the nails, we talked about the hammer, we talked about your means of cutting your leads. We've just talked about soldering your leads. The stage after the soldering, of course, is to cement. Now, I realise I've neglected to mention this tool. This one's a particularly knackered example. That's because ours get quite a lot of use. It's called a basil brush in the trade. That's a joke mainly for British stained glass people, I would imagine. It's a brass brush. I should have said at the soldering stage, I recommend you brush the joints where your leads meet prior to soldering with this tool, which we'll come back to in a second again, because the cleaner the solder area to be joined, the smoother your joint will be and the less heat you'll need, because basically you're brushing away any oxidation, you're brushing away the tarnish. So I would suggest using this on the joints just before you solder your panel together, and you'll then use it again after you've cemented your panel. When you do cement your panel, firstly I would recommend a plentiful supply of gloves, because you don't want to get this stuff on your hands. You don't want to get it on your clothes either, because lead cement will stain your clothes. A mucky old apron would probably be highly advisable. This one has been open for a little while. We certainly hear about folks who prefer to mix up their own using chalk, whiting, linseed oil, grape blacking and so on. You certainly can make it yourself. The ingredients are inexpensive, but your time might be more valuable. Certainly I value my time highly enough to make it worth buying tubs of cement. We buy these small ones. These ones are from Creative Glass. They seem to be the guys in the UK who do the smaller sizes. Why do we buy the smaller sizes? Well, it means that each student can have a tub if they're working on a big project. It does dry out lead cement. You know, the linseed oil dries out, and then the cement becomes progressively less and less workable. You can rejuvenate it a little bit with a tiny bit of linseed oil or a tiny bit of white spirit, but only so much. Once that contents of that start to go a bit solid, you can't use it. And buying it in smaller tubs means you're less likely to waste the bottom half of a big tub that's gone off or gone solid before you got to use it. So my personal tip would be, see if you can, unless you're working on a really huge project or you have several projects lined up to do over 1 week, for example, I would recommend the smaller tubs, these from Creative Glass, 800 grams, less likely to waste it. You'll also need whiting, comes in bags. We tend to buy small bags and then put it in little tubs for students, because of course if it gets spilled or it gets contaminated with cement, it's no good to you. So decant what you need rather than give your students or use yourself a whole big tub full. So that's the whiting. You need your brush for brushing. These do tend to get pretty manky fairly quickly. They're fairly inexpensive. I haven't really found a good way to rejuvenate the brushes once they get clogged up with lead cement. So I think probably better just to buy several and have some spares. And then you'll need your basil brush again, your brass brush. And this is for brushing the leads to get the cement off those leads, because we discovered very early on in our time when we were making some windows for a commission, really, a year or two after we started doing it, we neglected to brush the cement off the leads after we'd cemented the windows, quite a big pair, each about 1 metre high. And it took almost as long to get the cement off the leads the week after as it did to make the windows themselves, because we neglected to brush the cement off the leads at the time that we cemented the panels. So do that, and that's what your brass brush is also for. A top tip: when the time comes to clean your windows, garden panels, whatever it is you're making with the leading method, I would suggest a paint scraper like that. It looks like a lead knife, but it's a paint scraper. It's much less sharp, and you can use that to cut around the edge of your lead and free off the cement we need to get rid of. And then this is where your brass brush comes in again, because brushing along like that will clean up the glass really nicely once the cement is dried. Make sure you leave a few days for the cement to dry first though. I should have said, when applying the cement, you want a sacrificial spatula really. I know people do it with their hands. I don't actually know how they do it. I know they do. Maybe I've got a hand cleanliness thing, even with the gloves. If you try to wear gloves and then work the cement in, the gloves kind of clag up with cement. So a spatula is the way. And if you've got a design that's got lots of little tiny corners, like in there, for example, you can always cut a spatula down so it comes to a point. Pretty useful tool that. You will find that the cement, of course, will harden on the spatula, but you can get that off. Not what you should be using your lead knife for, but you can get the cement off. And I think that's probably about it for all the tools that are specific to leading. So you need something to do your work on. This is what your leading board is for. You need your means of cutting the leads. Don't worry about the noise, that's happening outside. You need a means of cutting the leads. That's the lead nippers or the lead knife, depending on how you like to work, or who taught you, or how you taught yourself. You need hammer. I also neglected to mention the little wooden block. So when you're working on your leads, if you need to gently tap your design to get things seated, obviously you wouldn't tap against the glass with a hammer. You need something in between, and that's what your wooden block is for. You need your horseshoe nails, genuine nails for horses' shoes. You need your tallow and your solder. You need your leads. Make sure you've got enough leads for your project. You need your means of stretching the leads, the clamp which holds the lead vise on the bench. You need your means of soldering, the solder and the tallow. You need your means of cementing, your brushes, your basil brush, your spatula for applying the cement into, and remember that you're working the cement right under the leads. You're not kind of coating the whole glass, you're working it under the leads. So the less cement you get on the glass, the less cleaning you've got to do a few days later. You need your cement and your whiting. The other thing you might want to do once your panel is really cleaned is apply some Great Black, the stove polish. I think I'm going to do a little video on that because we get so many questions about how you do it, how you clean everything afterwards. But it gives you a nice sort of gunmetal-y dark finish. We tend to, the pieces that we make to sell in the gallery here, we tend to Great Black. Some of our students like to Great Black. We don't do that on a beginner's class because it's quite time consuming. Actually, the cleaning is really the time consuming bit. But we're happy to teach people how to do it. I'll do a little video on that at some point. And certainly some of our more advanced students, when they're working on quite big projects, or something that's quite special to them, or a commission or something like that, they might well Great Black or stove polish the leads because it does look really pucker. Brings out the colours of the glass as well. Right, I think that's probably all of the specific tools you need for stained glass leading as opposed to foiling. We didn't talk about the cutters or the soldering irons and things like that because I've already covered those in another video. If you've got questions though, you can always email us. What I'm going to do is put a list of all of these tools, or rather, I'll put the list on our website and then I'll include a link to that page in the information attached to this video, and I'll do the same for the foiling specific stained glass tools as well, so that you can see the kind of things that we suggest you use, the kind of tools that you can't really get away with or which will really make your life a lot easier. Final note, just out of shot of the camera is my dustpan and brush and my tub for lead offcuts, because as you know, you can't dispose of lead in your normal waste, your normal rubbish or refuse. You have to have it recycled. So we have a really friendly metals recycling plant down the other side of Milton Keynes, 20 minutes drive, and whenever we get to a point where we've got enough to fill the boot of the car, we whiz down there. Sometimes it's a van actually, it's the volume of lead is significant, and we get that currently, when is it now? It's April now. We currently get about 80p per kilo for the waste lead, so we get a little money back. It means it gets dealt with and recycled in the proper way because it's poisonous. It can't be allowed to get into waste, general household waste or anything like that. It would poison the water table. Right, I think that's enough of me waffling. Thanks for watching. See you again next time.